The story of Joseph and his brothers is one of the most compelling narratives in the book of Genesis. It's a tale of jealousy, betrayal, forgiveness, and reconciliation that spans many chapters, Genesis 37 to 50. Joseph was the 11th son out of the 12 sons of Jacob, also called Israel, and the first son of his beloved mother Rachel, Jacob's second wife. Jacob loved Joseph above his other sons because he was born to him in his old age. To show his special affection, Jacob made Joseph a coat of many colors, more splendid than any garment his other sons possessed. Seeing their father's favoritism, Joseph's brothers grew bitter with jealousy and could not speak kindly to him. When Joseph was 17 years old, he began to have unusual dreams. One night, he dreamed that he and his brothers were binding sheaves of grain in the field. Suddenly, Joseph's sheaf stood upright, while his brothers' sheaves gathered around and bowed down to his. Upon hearing this dream, his brothers scoffed, "Do you intend to reign over us? Will you indeed have dominion over us?" Their hatred for him grew even stronger. Soon after, Joseph had another dream. This time, the sun, moon, and 11 stars bowed down to him. When he told his father and brothers about this dream, even Jacob rebuked him, saying, "What is this dream that you have dreamed? Shall your mother, your brothers, and I indeed come to bow down to the earth before you?" Nevertheless, Jacob kept these words in his heart, while Joseph's brothers burned with envy. One day, Jacob sent Joseph to check on his brothers who were tending flocks near Shechem. When Joseph's brothers saw him approaching from afar, recognizable by his colorful coat, they plotted against him. "Look, this dreamer is coming," they said to one another. "Come now, let us kill him and throw him into one of the pits. Then we will say that a wild animal has devoured him. We shall see what becomes of his dreams." But Reuben, the eldest brother, could not bear the thought of shedding his brother's blood. "Let us not take his life," he urged. "Throw him into this pit in the wilderness, but do not lay a hand on him." Reuben secretly planned to rescue Joseph later and return him to their father. When Joseph reached his brothers, they stripped him of his beautiful coat and cast him into an empty pit. As they sat down to eat, they saw a caravan of Ishmaelite merchants passing by on their way to Egypt. Judah, another brother, suggested, "What profit is it if we kill our brother and conceal his blood? Come, let us sell him to the Ishmaelites, and let our hands not be upon him, for he is our brother, our own flesh." His brothers agreed, and they sold Joseph for 20 pieces of silver. The merchants took Joseph to Egypt, while his brothers dipped his coat in goat's blood and brought it to Jacob, letting him believe that a wild animal had devoured his beloved son. Jacob tore his clothes in grief and mourned for Joseph many days, refusing to be comforted. In Egypt, Joseph was sold to Potiphar, an officer of Pharaoh and captain of the guard. The Lord was with Joseph, and he prospered in everything he did. Potiphar noticed this and made Joseph overseer of his house, placing everything he owned under Joseph's authority. Under Joseph's management, Potiphar's household flourished, blessed by the Lord. Joseph grew to be a handsome and well-built young man. Before long, Potiphar's wife took notice of him and began to desire him. Day after day, she tried to seduce Joseph, but he refused her advances, saying, "How can I do this great wickedness and sin against God?" One day, when no one else was in the house, Potiphar's wife caught Joseph by his garment and demanded, "Lie with me." Joseph fled, leaving his garment in her hand. Humiliated and angry, she called to the other servants and accused Joseph of attempting to assault her, using his garment as evidence. When Potiphar heard his wife's account, his anger burned, and he had Joseph thrown into the prison where the king's prisoners were confined. Even in prison, the Lord remained with Joseph, showing him mercy and giving him favor in the sight of the prison keeper. Soon, Joseph was put in charge of all the prisoners, and the keeper paid no attention to anything under Joseph's authority because the Lord made everything he did prosper. Some time later, Pharaoh's chief cupbearer and chief baker offended their master and were put into the same prison as Joseph. One night, both men had dreams that troubled them. Noticing their distress the next morning, Joseph asked, "Why do you look so sad today?" They replied, "We have dreamt dreams, and there is no interpreter." Joseph said, "Do not interpretations belong to God? Tell me your dreams." The cupbearer described his dream. He saw a vine with 3 branches that bud, blossomed, and produced ripe grapes. He squeezed the grapes into Pharaoh's cup and placed it in Pharaoh's hand. Joseph interpreted, "The 3 branches are 3 days. Within 3 days, Pharaoh will lift up your head and restore you to your position, and you will place Pharaoh's cup in his hand as before." Joseph then added, "Remember me when it is well with you, and please show kindness by mentioning me to Pharaoh, to bring me out of this prison." The baker, encouraged by this favorable interpretation, shared his dream. He had 3 white baskets on his head, and birds were eating from the uppermost basket containing baked goods for Pharaoh. Joseph interpreted, the 3 baskets are 3 days. Within 3 days, Pharaoh will lift off your head and hang you on a tree, and the birds will eat your flesh. 3 days later, on Pharaoh's birthday, he restored the chief cupbearer to his position but hanged the chief baker, just as Joseph had interpreted. Despite Joseph's request, the cupbearer forgot about him, and Joseph remained in prison for 2 more years. After 2 full years, Pharaoh had a dream. He stood by the Nile, and 7 fine, fat cows came up out of the river and fed in the reed grass. After them, 7 ugly, thin cows came up and devoured the 7 fat cows. Pharaoh awoke, then fell asleep and dreamed again. This time, 7 plump, good ears of grain grew on one stalk. Then 7 thin, blighted ears sprouted after them and swallowed up the 7 plump ears. When Pharaoh awoke, he was troubled. In the morning, Pharaoh summoned all the Magians and wise men of Egypt to interpret his dreams, but none could explain them. Finally, the chief cupbearer remembered Joseph and told Pharaoh about the young Hebrew who had correctly interpreted his dream in prison. Pharaoh sent for Joseph at once. After shaving and changing his clothes, Joseph was brought before Pharaoh, who said, I have dreamed a dream, and there is no one who can interpret it. I have heard it said of you that when you hear a dream, you can interpret it. Joseph humbly replied, It is not in me. God will give Pharaoh a favorable answer. After hearing the dreams, Joseph explained, The dreams of Pharaoh are one. God has shown Pharaoh what he is about to do. The 7 good cows and the 7 good ears are 7 years of plenty. The 7 thin cows and the 7 empty ears are 7 years of famine that will follow. There will come 7 years of great plenty throughout the land of Egypt, followed by 7 years of famine so severe that the plenty will be forgotten. Joseph continued, The dream was repeated twice because the matter is determined by God, and God will shortly bring it to pass. Now, let Pharaoh select a discerning and wise man, and set him over the land of Egypt. Let him appoint officers to collect 1/5 of the produce during the 7 plentiful years as a reserve for the land against the 7 years of famine. Pharaoh was impressed by Joseph's wisdom and said to his servants, Can we find anyone like this man, in whom is the Spirit of God? To Joseph, he declared, Since God has shown you all this, there is no one as discerning and wise as you. You shall be over my house, and all my people shall be ruled according to your word. Only in regard to the throne will I be greater than you. Pharaoh removed his signet ring and placed it on Joseph's hand, clothed him in fine linen, and put a gold chain around his neck. He made Joseph ride in the 2nd chariot, and servants cried out before him, Bow the knee. Thus, Joseph became ruler over all Egypt, second only to Pharaoh himself. Pharaoh gave Joseph a new name, Zaphnath-Paneah, and arranged for him to marry Asenath, daughter of Potiphar, priest of On. Joseph was 30 years old when he entered Pharaoh's service. During the 7 years of plenty, Joseph gathered enormous quantities of grain, storing it in cities throughout Egypt. When the 7 years of plenty ended, and famine began to spread, people from all countries came to Egypt to buy grain from Joseph, for the famine was severe in all lands. The famine reached Canaan, where Jacob and his sons lived. Hearing that there was grain in Egypt, Jacob said to his sons, Why do you look at one another? Go down to Egypt and buy grain for us there, that we may live and not die. So Joseph's 10 older brothers went down to buy grain in Egypt, but Jacob kept Benjamin, Joseph's younger brother, at home, fearing harm might come to him. When the brothers arrived in Egypt, they came before Joseph, now governor of the land, and bowed down to him with their faces to the ground. Joseph recognized his brothers immediately, but they did not recognize him. He spoke harshly to them, accusing them of being spies. No, my lord, they protested, your servants have come to buy food. We are all one man's sons, we are honest men, not spies. Joseph insisted, No, you have come to see the nakedness of the land. They explained, Your servants are 12 brothers, the sons of one man in Canaan. The youngest is with our father, and one is no more. Joseph said, By this you shall be tested, by the life of Pharaoh, you shall not leave this place unless your youngest brother comes here. Send one of you to bring your brother, while the rest remain in prison. After 3 days, Joseph modified his demand, Do this and live, for I fear God. If you are honest men, let one of your brothers remain confined here, while the rest carry grain for the famine of your households. Bring your youngest brother to me, so your words will be verified, and you shall not die. The brothers said to one another, We are truly guilty concerning our brother Joseph, for we saw the anguish of his soul when he pleaded with us, and we would not hear, therefore this distress has come upon us. They did not realize that Joseph understood them, as he used an interpreter. Joseph turned away from them and wept. When he returned, he took Simeon and bound him before their eyes. Then Joseph gave orders to fill their sacks with grain, return each man's money to his sack, and provide them with provisions for their journey. When the brothers returned to Jacob, they told him all that had happened and discovered their money in their sacks. Jacob was distressed and refused to let Benjamin go to Egypt, saying, "My son shall not go down with you, for his brother is dead, and he is left alone. If any harm should befall him on the journey, you would bring down my gray hair with sorrow to the grave." But as the famine worsened and their grain supply dwindled, Jacob finally consented to send Benjamin with his brothers, along with a gift for the man Joseph, and double the money to return what had been put back in their sacks. When the brothers arrived in Egypt with Benjamin, Joseph ordered his steward to bring them to his house for a meal. Frightened by this unusual treatment, they explained to the steward about finding their money in their sacks. The steward reassured them and brought out Simeon to join them. When Joseph came home, they presented their gifts and bowed down to him. Joseph asked about their father and was deeply moved upon seeing his brother Benjamin. Overcome with emotion, he hurried out to a private chamber and wept. After composing himself, he returned and hosted the meal, seating his brothers in order of age, much to their astonishment. Benjamin received 5 times more food than the others. Before they departed, Joseph instructed his steward to fill their sacks with food, return their money again, and place his silver cup in Benjamin's sack. Shortly after they left the city, Joseph sent his steward to overtake them and accuse them of stealing the cup. When the cup was found in Benjamin's sack, the brothers tore their clothes in distress and returned to the city. Judah approached Joseph and made an impassioned plea, explaining how their father would die of grief if Benjamin did not return. He offered himself as a slave in Benjamin's place, showing true repentance and brotherly love. Unable to control his emotions any longer, Joseph ordered all his attendants to leave. Then he wept aloud and revealed himself to his brothers, saying, "I am Joseph. Is my father still alive?" His brothers were stunned and could not answer him. Joseph said, "Please come near to me." When they came near, he said, "I am Joseph your brother, whom you sold into Egypt. But now, do not be distressed or angry with yourselves because you sold me here, for God sent me before you to preserve life. The famine has been in the land for 2 years, and there are still 5 years in which there will be neither plowing nor harvesting. God sent me before you to preserve a remnant on earth and to save your lives by a great deliverance." Joseph embraced Benjamin and wept, then kissed all his brothers and wept over them. After this, his brothers talked with him freely. When Pharaoh heard that Joseph's brothers had come, he was pleased and told Joseph to send for their father and their households to live in Egypt. He promised them the best of the land. Joseph gave his brothers wagons, provisions, and changes of clothes. To Benjamin, he gave 300 pieces of silver and 5 changes of clothes. He sent his father 10 donkeys loaded with the best things of Egypt and 10 female donkeys loaded with grain, bread, and food for his father's journey. As his brothers departed, Joseph cautioned them, "Do not quarrel on the way." When the brothers returned to Canaan and told Jacob that Joseph was alive and ruler of Egypt, Jacob was stunned and initially did not believe them. But when he saw the wagons Joseph had sent, his spirit revived, and he said, "It is enough. Joseph my son is still alive. I will go and see him before I die." Jacob set out with all his family and possessions. At Beersheba, God spoke to him in a vision, assuring him not to fear going to Egypt, for God would make him a great nation there and would bring him back to Canaan. Jacob's family numbered 70 persons when they came to Egypt. Joseph prepared his chariot and went to Goshen to meet his father. When he appeared before him, he fell on his neck and wept for a long time. Jacob said to Joseph, "Now let me die, since I have seen your face and know that you are still alive." Joseph settled his father and brothers in the best part of the land, in Goshen, as Pharaoh had commanded. He provided food for his father, his brothers, and all his father's household according to the number of their dependents. Jacob lived in Egypt 17 years, reaching the age of 147. Before he died, he blessed Joseph's sons, Ephraim and Manasseh, and all his own sons, giving each a prophetic blessing appropriate to his character. Thus, through God's providence, what began as a story of jealousy and betrayal became a tale of forgiveness, reconciliation, and salvation for the family that would become the nation of Israel.